Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you would mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I really appreciate that. I also love it when people leave comments, so if you have some thoughts about this video, or you want to suggest a video, or maybe you want to tell me how you do things, or just say hi. I like all of those things, and it's nice to hear from me when you do that, so leave a comment. So I've seen a number of pieces in the past, and I've tried to do some things like this occasionally. I've never been all that fond of the result, but some things that where you have a bezel set stone, and then you have some decorations that kind of bend over it a little bit. And I'm going to try to do something like that today and see if we can pull that off and make it look cool. I have seen some nice ones like that, but as a general rule, I don't usually cover up much of the stone with stuff because most of the time I'm really trying to display the stone as best I can. So, however, let's give it a try and see if it works out. Before we do that, though, I wanted to thank some groups of people. The first group is my patrons over on Patreon, and I have a relatively good-sized group over there, and they're a nice group of people with a lot of cool talents. And it's fun to talk to them, and I do appreciate their financial support and also the community that they've created over there. It's really nice, so thanks for that. The other group is my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 20,900, I think, which is awesome. Thank you for that. What I most like about YouTube is the nice comments I get. People say the nicest things. And when they tell me things like I've helped them to pull out of a creative slump or I've taught them something new, that really makes my day. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the financial support, the buy me a coffee and the super thanks. Those things help a lot with the cost of materials right now. So thanks for that. All right, well, let's get started on this ring. This is one of my design idea sketchbooks you can get on my merch store. This particular one has a useful chart on the back, as do some of the other new ones. This one has a American wire gauge to inches to millimeters. There's another one that I use a lot, and it's the fractions of an inch to decimals in inches to millimeters. I find both of those ones very useful, but what I like most about these is the graph paper on them that's kind of subtle in the background. It's just a dot matrix kind of thing, but that helps me to draw up my designs a lot better because I can't draw very symmetrically without some guidance. Okay, so here was Saturday's one, but then I realized I did this one upside down. I do that occasionally. I have the book upside down and then I sketch my sketch out. So this one is, I picked out some rectangular stones. I was going to do, this is supposedly turquoise from China. I don't know if it's really turquoise or not, but it's interesting looking. This is some sort of agate, and it's pretty. It may be a Lake Superior or something. And this is Ocean Jasper, which technically is an agate as well, but this comes from Madagascar. And this is the one I decided on. I originally drew up a general design with this one, but I think it's a little big. And kind of washed out color too, so I want something with a little color in it on this one. I like the earth tones on this one. It's got kind of an olive green matrix in the background. It's kind of mossy looking with a little oolitic formations is a better term probably. But which is typical of Ocean Jasper. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a bezel for this, and then I think I'm going to make each of these little flaps here that are going to bend down over it like this. So, and that's going to go over the edge of the bezel too. So we're going to have to mount all the bezel, these things, and then a border of 16 gauge square wire around the outside. As kind of an outside border on top of a piece of sheet. And I think I'm going to use 22 gauge, which is 0.66 millimeters for the base. This stuff here that's going to be on the side is going to be 22 gauge sheet with some flattened 16 gauge square. 16 gauge square is 1.3 millimeters, but it's going to be much thinner than the other dimension. I think I have it on the pickle. I just rolled it through the rolling mill a minute ago. So that'll be soldered down to create that decorative edge like that. Like I said, 16 gauge square around the outside. That'll be unflattened, and that's this size right here. And then I'm going to use some 8 gauge half round for 3 bands that are parallel to each other on here. So this is going to be a honkin' ring. Somebody who likes big rings is going to be the one who ends up with this one, I think. So hopefully it turns out pretty, but let's make a bezel for this to get started. So, oh, I'm using, this is a 0.41 millimeter bezel, which is 26 gauge. And it's 3/16 inch tall, which is 4.76 millimeters, if I recall. So let's file the end flat. It should be plenty tall for this. In fact, I will have to file it down probably. Because I don't want this sticking up super high. Whenever you're doing something with corners, you never want to put the end of where you're going to solder the bezel together. You don't want to put it right on the corner. It never works out very well if you do that. Trust me on this. So now let's try and get it relatively snug though. I don't want to have a lot of play in it. Okay, that's far too far out, so we're going to move that bend a little bit. The way you can move a bend is to grab it a little bit offset like this and pinch. And that'll migrate the bend a little bit. A little bit more. Sometimes when I'm doing a little bit of a bigger bezel like this, put a dimple in the bottom. That makes it a little springier, so you get these two ends pushing together nice. If you're new to this, when you heat up the metal, it relaxes a little bit. That's just kind of what happens. And sometimes it'll pull apart a little bit if it's just barely touching. So that leads to a bad solder joint, oftentimes with a crack on either side. And then people would then ridicule you and ride you out of town on a rail. But actually, no, it's nice to have a little bit of spring going forward like that, because then if it does relax, it's still touching. So. Just do a little straightening out here. That's not too bad. I think that's within our size tolerances. I'm going to tell you this trick in case I forget to tell you at the end, but when you go to set something that has corners like this, when you get to that stage and you're trying to get those corners to bend over, oftentimes There's just a little bit too much metal there to really lay down nice and flat. And so if you thin it out right at the top here, just a little bit, right before you set it, and then it'll just reduce the volume of metal right in that corner and makes it easier to lay it down over the corner. So you see people do all sorts of weird things, cutting notches and taking little 45-degree pieces out, or you know, whatever kind of things that they do, but I think that works the best for me. Alright, so we need to cut a piece that's big enough for that border on there, as well as the two little 22 gauge kind of flappy things. And so let's see if we can do that. This is 22. I'm going to cut it so that I have plenty, because I'd rather have too much than not enough. I could make all the decorations first, but I might as well get this ready. That should be plenty. That should give us plenty of room to work with, so let's solder that down on there. Oh, I didn't really explain this at the beginning like I usually do. I use hard silver sheet solder primarily. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on with a dropper bottle. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's their acetylene air torch. It draws in atmospheric air through here to mix with the gas to make it burn better. It's not as hot as an oxyacetylene torch, but it's hotter than a propane torch generally. So it's really a nice happy medium for silver. It works great. I've been using that one for years. Actually, it's the second one. I've worn one out. I think acetylene air is the way to go with silver for me. Okay, so let's get it fluxed. And then we'll put some these little chips of solder around the inside. Somebody's probably going to ask how my rock hounding trip went, but we had to cancel it because of weather, so we're going to try to reschedule a rock hounding trip for next weekend. So this is a little bit thicker sheet on the bottom here, and that has got a lot more mass than the bezel does. And so I'm going to be primarily heating the sheet, not the bezel so much. Trick to get around that problem is you can heat from below, like this if you want to. That way the flame isn't directly hitting the bezel. So you can pump a lot of heat in there. Get it almost to the flow temperature. And when you jump up here, it's right there already. Oftentimes people who are new to this have trouble getting the bezel soldered down onto a back. And that's mostly because of that. The bezel is exposed to the flame pretty readily, whereas the back is kind of laying flat and protected from the heat by the bezel. So you gotta manipulate where your heat's going, kind of. After a while, you kind of get the feel for that, and it just kind of happens now. We need to probably cut some pieces for this little part there. And rather than trying to get them off this little piece, I'm going to find a newer piece of this that's got a straighter edge. So let's mark it. It's really only going to come from here to here. The stone's going to be sitting pretty low, So it doesn't have to be very long down below that, just a little bit. But this will probably be raised up a tiny bit. So, again, we'll make it a little bit bigger than it needs to be, and then we'll file it down until it's just where we want it to be. But maybe I should file this down first, get this a little bit shorter. Okay, I did some experimenting. I wanted to make sure that I'd be able to bend this sideways like I wanted to, because when you have something that's wider in one dimension than the other, it bends easily in the narrow dimension, but not so much in the other dimension. So I did a little playing with this and came up with one. And I cut these to be just about the same size as the bezel itself. So we'll be making another one of these like this. Hopefully we can get it to match pretty close. And then we'll solder them each down. Kind of like that. And then we'll trim off the excess on the top so that we have kind of a cool wavy border. And I was using mostly my bail making pliers, so you got to be careful because it's going to try and twist on you when you do this. It doesn't want to bend this way. So I do it kind of slowly. If I need to, I stop, flatten that back out again, because it's going to keep trying to twist on you. So now we won't need it to bend back up there. And right there we need to start bending them back the other way. Now we're getting there. I think that's pretty close on this side. That's surprisingly close. I don't care if this gets a little bit thinner, so I'm going to go and use a white abrasive silicone wheel to kind of smooth that out on both sides again. Then we'll cut it down, and then we'll probably sweat a little bit of solder on here and put it on there and see if we can get it to stick down. So, okay, I got these all kind of lined up. I'm going to cut some little pieces of solder, and we're going to pre-melt some solder on the backs of these. I guess we can go ahead and fix these things too. Okay, I do something called pick soldering sometimes, which allows me to pick up a piece of solder like that on the end of this titanium pick, in theory, and then heat the piece up to the soldering temperature and then place it there, and it should just jump on. If you're interested, I have a good video about it up there. It's one of those skills that really helps a lot, I think. It makes many situations much easier. So we're just going to pre-melt a little solder here. It's called sweat soldering. When you pre-melt some solder somewhere where it needs to be. Time it right, it just jumps right on there. I have a tendency to get impatient and stick it in there too soon. However, when you do it right, it really works well. Okay. So we can get these lined up nicely. That looks pretty good. Let's see if we can do it. Probably cut off these bottom parts. So if you wanted to, you could take your saw and cut that out like that. I'm going to just do it the quick and easy way, is I'm going to trim it off like as much as I can this way. We'll just use a bulber to grind that away. So hopefully you can't see the gigantic mess over here, but we're just going to see, I have a bulber on here. Hold it kind of low. And then I'll just use a silicone wheel to clean that up probably. So I'm going to do that on both of them. So I cut a T-pin so that the head was gone, and I bent it. And I'm trying to get this to solder right to the base down there, but I don't want it to really solder anywhere else. One of these sides has a solder joint, so I'm going to solder this one on. And that's being held a little bit apart at the top there. And hopefully we can do that. We'll give it a try. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll give it a shot. It'll be a fun experiment. You could use one of those substances that people use to stop the solder from flowing. I know some people use whiteout, water-based whiteout. Make sure you use, or what do you call it? Red Rouge, I think, which is a polishing compound. Mix that with water, I think. That's actually pretty good as long as it doesn't move on me. Guess we'll find out. Probably a way easier way to do this. If anybody knows, let me know. Okay, so our next step is going to be making a square frame for this. Okay, I'm going to try and get that to lay flat. I think I'm going to use a little bit of medium paste liner if I can find it. We'll see if we can't get this, laid down a little bit. This side seems tight over here. Put a couple of these in here so it can't slide over anymore. That way when it starts to flow I can push that one over just a little bit, hopefully. Okay, I think I got it soldered down. Let's cut the rest off here. Just kind of trim it off right around the outside edge. Okay, let's clean it up a bit with the file. So I'm going to get some 8 gauge half round. I have some here or there. No. There's a couple pieces. I need one more piece. So what I've done here is I've gotten 3 straight pieces. I cut them to be about a size 9 and got them all as straight as I could, and I laid them out pretty parallel. What I'm going to do in order to keep them parallel as I solder them on to this is I'm going to temporarily solder on these things as little holders, but to do that I'm going to sweat a little bit of hard solder onto them. I like to have it drop right to the size you want it to be. That's pretty close. So my next step is going to be filing this stuff flat so that I can just solder it on like that. Looks pretty good. Let's push this into this softer pad here. And I made some marks to try and help me get this lined up. This is one of my, not one of my strongest parts, is getting things on there straight when I'm soldering a band on or something. So sometimes having some marks helps me to, you know, get it a little bit closer. Okay, we're going to use a little bit of easy for this one. I used to use hard solder for pretty much everything, but there are times where this stuff is pretty useful. If you got multiple bands like this, you always want to make sure each one is actually soldered down. A couple of times in the past, well, many times when I first started doing this, I would get done polishing, and then I'd realize one of them wasn't soldered. So I think it's probably okay. I'm going to cut these off of here, clean it up, and then throw it in the pickle. And go rest my back a little bit because my back's starting to hurt, and then we'll finish it. And we're going to have to do something like pound this down with something, because that's not fine silver like the bezel is. It's sterling and it's thick. But we'll have to set the stone first, and then we'll pound that down. So I'm going to cut these off and clean them up, and we'll pickle. So I came back after eating, and I just started doing this without realizing I was doing it, kind of. I just kind of was in the zone. And then I thought, oh, I'm supposed to be filming this. So I polished it up, and then I set this. When you have a situation where you have not much space between something on the outside of the bezel and the bezel, sometimes you can get in those spaces with a knife and use the blade of the knife as a bezel pusher, kind of. And that's what I did in this case on both sides. Like that. And I do this differently than a lot of people, but I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher. In most cases. And then on these corners, like I said, I file them a little bit thinner, and then I push down straight onto them like that. Quite a bit of force, and that usually gets it pretty tight. And on the parts that I can, I'm going to burnish it. Okay, now we have to figure out a way to get these bent over a little bit. So let me think about that, and I'll come back and show you. Okay, I got one side to pretty much lay down. And what I've been doing is tapping this down with a plastic hammer using the back side of a dapping punch. So basically I'm just going to right there. tap that down. It's likely going to be about as good as I can get it. I'm going to take the Dremel with a white or a blue polishing, a fine polishing wheel, silicone wheel, and kind of clean up that top where I was just hammering on it. And then we'll get some pictures of it. Okay, well that was a ring with some overlay designs on the top. I'm not sure what we're going to call that yet, but if you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And I'd love it if you would take a moment and go to my main channel page and check out some of my other content. I have 480 some videos now. I've been doing these at 3 per week for more than 3 years now, and that grows to be quite a pile of content, and some of it is pretty good, I think. So check it out. You'll find some interesting stuff there, hopefully, and make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you like the content here and you're interested in finding out more about my Patreon, there's several different tiers of membership there, and you can click the link in the video description down below to check out more about it. But the lowest tier is just basically getting my videos without the YouTube advertising, and that is kind of nice because I know they sometimes load them up with ads, and that's irritating to say the least. So check that out. There's other tiers as well that give you more privileges, some exclusive content, as well as some live streams and things like that. So I have a lot of people at the second tier level, and that seems to be my most popular tier, where you get some access to some other stuff. All the tiers get access to my Discord server, though, which is a kind of a chat server where you can post pictures of what you're working on. You can ask advice of each other. It's a nice venue that allows for some good interaction amongst some people with similar interests. So check that out. I think it's a good deal. The other links that are down there are, there's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks. I find those invaluable anymore, and it's a great way to keep track of your projects for the future when you don't always remember what when you get to be my age, you don't remember what you made before. So it's a good way to keep track of things. The other link is to my ebook, my newest ebook, and there's actually one for the year before as well if you're interested. But those are guides to my tutorials from each year, and there's a page for each of the tutorials. This last year there was over 170, and each page has information about the project, some pictures, a picture of my sketch, and a list of materials, advice that I give you, extra advice about the project, things I might have figured out while I was doing it, how I might do it differently, all those things, as well as a link right to the video. So it's a useful tool, puts a whole bunch of projects at your fingertips, and it also is a nice way to support my channel. So get yourself one of those. I think they're valuable. All right, well, thank you for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.